Well, I'm delighted today to be speaking to Hussein Haeri, who's a partner at Withers here in London. Welcome, Hussein.
Thank you, David.
So delighted to be working with you on our inaugural event in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia this November. Withers are a well-known law firm here on the scene in London, but it'd be great to hear from you how you describe and pitch the firm, if you like, to the families that you work with.
Thank you. So Withers historically has been a preeminent firm for high net worth individuals, family offices. We act for more than 60% of the Sunday Times 100 Rich List. And as you can imagine, with that client network, we do a lot of work in the Middle East for family offices, high net worth individuals, and increasingly also for corporations. So we're delighted to be partnering with you on this event in Riyadh.
Fantastic. And your focus is around disputes. Perhaps tell us a little bit about the disputes practice here.
Absolutely. So there is a dispute resolution division in which we have an international arbitration group, which I co-head. And we've seen significant amount of cross-border disputes in the region. Naturally, that follows from cross-border investments, projects, transactions. And increasingly, those disputes do follow. We've also seen very significant investment by Saudi Arabia in establishing Riyadh as a major arbitration center. And that, I think, is developing more and more traction in the context of the Vision 2030.
And how is that changing the landscape for the role that you undertake and how disputes might be settled? What other options does it give, or how does it change the dynamic?
I think there's an increasing and quite extensive now sophistication around international dispute resolution, bringing in different experts from various jurisdictions, expertise to resolve the disputes in a commercial way that perhaps historically was not always necessarily the means of resolving these sorts of matters. And so that sort of professionalization of these large disputes, that's something which I think we've seen quite a lot of development towards.
And give us an example of some of the kind of disputes that you might work on. What give us a flavour of it?
Absolutely. So one client we've currently got is a Saudi Arabian company. It was a sales transaction. They weren't paid. They've got LCIA arbitration seated here in London under English law. A dispute with a company in Asia. Another project that we've got is for a large bank in the Middle East against a central bank that defaulted on payment of a loan agreement. So those sorts of cross-border disputes, whether the situs of the project was in the Middle East and the arbitration is in London or in Geneva, for example, or you've got a dispute relating to an arbitration that's seated in the region. Those are the sorts of disputes that we frequently see.
And for the November event, I mean, what kind of contacts are you seeking to meet? Are there different styles of professional on the ground there that you'd want to engage with?
Yeah, so we often work as co-counsel with law firms in the region, and we're able to team up and add expertise where there are cross-border disputes of a certain nature and often magnitude in which it makes sense to involve us. So we're often working closely with local lawyers across the region and of course directly with family offices and investors wanting to ensure that their structures have the benefit of all the protections they would need so that in the event that there are disputes, whether it be a joint venture dispute or a dispute relating to family members or a cross-border project, that all the arbitration and enforcement protections are properly in place so that if they're needed, they're available.
Because you could be called in from a wide variety of professional sources, couldn't you? Whether it's, as you say, the trustees might be the first or might be the bank, a law firm. I guess you don't know where the inquiry is going to come from, I suppose, in that way.
Absolutely right. And we work with all of the above on these sorts of matters.
And what's your assessment on the family office market? So both like the local family offices in Saudi, but also perhaps the London-based but Middle East or Saudi-focused family offices here in London?
A lot of activity, obviously. Lots of investment in various sectors. We've seen technology, hotels, hospitality, luxury goods, sports-related investments, as well as, of course, sort of traditional industrial property development and oil and gas and other construction projects. So lots of investments from family offices, both interest into investing into the region, but also, of course, investments from high net worth individuals and family offices from the region, investing into Europe, Asia, and the Americas.
And if there's disputes within families, do you get involved in mediation, trying to solve things privately? I mean, and perhaps you could explain why there's different channels and different tools available for families looking to resolve disputes.
Absolutely. And confidentiality is very key in the context of resolving those sorts of disputes. Mediation can be helpful. Arbitration also has an advantage in that it is generally confidential, provided that that's stipulated in terms of the applicable law or rules. But there's a means of making it confidential. And that's a big advantage for resolving those sorts of disputes, because often we're dealing with persons who have significant public profiles and are disinclined, of course, towards having those sorts of disputes aired publicly. So mediation, confidential arbitration, these are very often appealing options for dispute resolution. Of course, there's a difference in that arbitration gives rise to a final and enforceable outcome, like a court judgment that can be enforced in many countries around the world, whereas mediation is a process that can facilitate parties reaching a consensual agreement, but there's no binding or enforceable sort of element typically to it in the way that there is for arbitration.
Thank you. And have you seen the region develop over the years you've worked with clients in the region, and what do you see for the future? Is there any interesting trends that you see?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen huge development in the region. It's obviously one of the most dynamic, one of the most exciting parts of the world. And one of the things that's interesting is to see how the economies are broadening, how the societies in many ways are broadening as well. And that is reflected in the sorts of transactions that are being done, the sorts of projects that are being undertaken, and of course also thereby the sorts of disputes that arise, which starts to become much more across the spectrum of the economy, as compared with being concentrated in certain areas, oil and gas, for example, historically, and construction towards a far broader range of issues.
And it's very interesting to read in the newspapers Saudi global investment, but particularly in the sports sector, and that often brings them into contact with investments in the UK, isn't it? I think, that there's definitely more discussion and interest in cross-border investment from Saudi on a global basis, but then it raises awareness in the UK, I think, also of opportunities and ways to work together with firms in Saudi and elsewhere. Do you see that as well, just an increased interest and opportunity to do business together?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the Vision 2030 really reflects that there's a sort of, platform for increased investments and focus, and definitely greater interest and awareness from international investors as well.
And what do you think is the key value of clients coming to London for independent advice around of some of these disputes, which might not have a UK nexus, but are seeking to have the best quality minds on it? What's your pitch, as it were, for the London legal world here?
Well, I mean, London and the UK, I think, remains really tried and tested for international dispute resolution. There's a very long pedigree of neutral adjudication in this jurisdiction. I think that there's a great confidence in it internationally, and that certainly continues to be the case. So, we see that certainly presently and in the foreseeable future continuing, both for investors from the region, but also more generally to maintain London as a leading international seat for dispute resolution.
Fantastic. Well, Hussein, great to talk to you today, and really look forward to seeing you in Riyadh in November.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.